This agent couldn't answer any questions that we were asking. Nothing. And I joked with him and I said, for someone who's selling a property for $1.2 million, you don't seem to know a whole lot about it. And he looked at me and he said, whether I know everything about this property or nothing, it's selling tomorrow. That is the ultimate seller's market. Welcome to the Loan Daddy podcast. My name is Scott Nadler and this is episode 1. I want to talk about markets and mentors. I've had a mentor for a long time in this industry, being in the mortgage industry for 16 years. One thing that he said for a long time is understanding what kind of market you're in is very important in determining what your strategy is as far as how you're advising real estate agents and home buyers and homeowners. I've had various mentors and coaches throughout the years, and I think coaches and mentors fall into 3 categories. Category 1 is someone who is not in your industry and may have never sold or done anything, but they have tools and they are professional coaches. So they have systems, they have a skill set, whether it's motivation or from an organizational standpoint, on advising people on how they can achieve the success that they're ultimately looking for. The second category of mentor is someone who worked alongside someone who achieved a lot of success. So think of maybe a top real estate agent out there and they had a right-hand person for 25 years who watched them throughout all those years achieve a lot of success. And then that person becomes a coach or a mentor. And then you start working with them. They've never actually done it themselves, but they worked hand in hand alongside someone who has, and they know how to advise you based on that. And then the third category is someone who has done it. They've been in the industry, they've worked it, they've achieved a lot of success, and maybe even potentially they're still in it. They're still doing it, but they're also able to coach and mentor people. So I've worked with people in all 3 categories, and the most success that I've had personally, and this is just me, is with someone who is in the industry and who's actively doing it. So my mentor has always told me about the importance of markets. And defining the markets is also just really important, right? Are you in a buyer's market? Are you in a seller's market? Or are you in a transitional market? A seller's market is really one in which the inventory out there in the market is 0 to 3 months. Meaning if no other property were to be listed, all the inventory would be gone in somewhere between 0 and 3 months. And when you're in a seller's market, that's where you have more buyers than sellers. I mean, I think back to 2021 where we were in the ultimate seller's market. I remember going with a friend of mine to the Hamptons. She was interested in buying a second home in the Hamptons. So we go out to the Hamptons and we go to this property that was on the market for 1 day. We walk in and the real estate agent is wearing a ripped Rolling Stones t-shirt and cargo pants and flip-flops, okay? Not the most professional attire. And being in the mortgage industry, I walked over to the agent to introduce myself and I asked him a few questions about the property. Basic questions. This agent couldn't answer any questions that we were asking. Nothing. And I joked with him and I said, for someone who's selling a property for $1.2 million, you don't seem to know a whole lot about it. And he looked at me and he said, whether I know everything about this property or nothing, it's selling tomorrow. That is the ultimate seller's market. Then you shift over to a buyer's market. This is one in which the inventory in the market is 5+ months. And that is where you have more sellers than buyers. So buyers in that instance have a lot more leverage. And then there's that transitional market, a market where it's probably 3 to 5 months worth of inventory. And it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And it really depends on the situation. New York City, for example, is unique in the sense of you could have one unit on one side of the street that is acting more like a buyer's market. And then across the street, there could be another property that's acting more like a seller's market. So understanding that is really, really important. So for example, if you are working in a seller's market, right? This is one where the sellers have leverage. There's a lot more buyers out there than there are sellers. If you're representing a buyer, What is your strategy with that buyer? How are you going to help that buyer win? And for those buyers, it's so important to start early. You want to make sure that they're properly pre-approved, that they have all their documentation ready. They're ready to act quickly. Speed and certainty is going to be of the utmost importance when you're working in a seller's market, because cash is going to win in a lot of those instances. And if you have an all cash buyer, fantastic. But the majority of people out there are not all cash. In those instances, a lot of it may require waiving the mortgage contingency entirely, or at minimum going in with a reduced mortgage contingency to set your buyer apart from anyone else that is out there. If you're working more in a buyer's market, which I think by and large right now, New York City is in a buyer's market, you have leverage. And also in a buyer's market, most buyers, and a lot of what we ultimately compete with is most people in a buyer's market are told it's not a good time to buy. They're told that interest rates are too high. There's not enough inventory out there. You're better off waiting. But in reality, I'd rather be a buyer in a buyer's market versus one in a seller's market. I think we all understand that. So in a buyer's market with leverage, you can negotiate more seller credits. You can negotiate better prices for yourself or for your buyer. Understanding that and understanding that you have leverage gives buyers a lot more confidence. So when they're told and they see things on TikTok and Instagram and the mainstream media, and they're being told, do not buy a home right now. The housing market is weak. Interest rates are too high, it's not affordable, etc. Understanding this will get someone to think a little bit differently. You know, Warren Buffett always says, sell when people are greedy and buy when people are fearful. That's ultimately what this is. We were working with someone recently who they came to us and they said, interest rates are too high right now, and it doesn't make sense for me to buy because interest rates are a little bit too high. And I said, you know, what do you need the rate to be? And he threw out a rate that was 0.5% lower than where the market was. And I said, if the rate was 0.5% lower, you would move forward? And he said, absolutely. So first of all, that's incredible information to have, right? You're giving me the answers to the test before the exam even starts. Telling me that allowed me to go back to his real estate agent and look at the difference between the rate of where the market was versus his preferred rate. And the difference between those two rates and that payment was $270 a month. So I said to the agent, I said, do you think for the property that this buyer is interested in, do you think we can negotiate a $10,000 seller credit? So why $10,000? And the reason for $10,000 is because $270 a month times 36 months for 3 years is just about $10,000. So if you negotiate a $10,000 credit, that's the equivalent of this buyer having his desired rate for the next 3 years. And that's exactly what happened. This agent requested a $10,000 seller credit. As a result, got their offer accepted, and this buyer had their payment theoretically be lower than where the market is. It's not even theoretical. You know, $10,000, it doesn't matter how you spin it. Either this client had the rate that was 0.5% lower, or the $10,000 back represented him having that, again, for the next 3 years. It's a different way of looking at it. It's a different way of looking at the market. And this allowed this buyer, again, someone who in a buyer's market is being told now is not a good time to buy, ended up moving forward. And he closed on that transaction about a month and a half ago. So it's a different way of looking at it and framing it. Any questions on this, feel free to put it in the comments section. You can always direct message me as well, and we will have more episodes coming up on various topics that can help the real estate agent community. Looking forward to doing more of these. We'll talk soon. See you soon. Bye.